Justin.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Justin O'Donnell with True Politics, and today we have Peter Giblett with us. Peter is a senior partner at Invictus Legal LLP. He is a qualified British barrister and is a constitutional expert, which is very handy because the topic we're talking about today is the constitutionality and even the outright legality of the recent election Premier Doug Ford has called in a very controversial manner. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you,
First
Justin.
of all, explain for the audience why this election is so controversial to begin with.
Well, it's given that we have, as part of our election law, we have strict 4-year terms, and this applies to both the federal government and the provincial government here in Ontario. And that what a 4-year term states is that, for example, that Section 9.2 of the Elections Act in Ontario states that subject to the powers of the Lieutenant Governor, referred to in Section 1 of this, the general election shall be held on the first Thursday in June in the 4th calendar year following the most recent general election. So that would have been amended soon after the last election would occur. And well, in fact, actually, it would have been the last time it would have been amended would have been when the June elections were set up. So typically that means that unless you have a minority government that loses a confidence vote, typically that should mean that the next general election will be on the 1st of June in 4 years after the last election. So therefore, that would have been the 1st of June 2026 in relation to the province of Ontario. All right.
Okay. Now, apparently, Premier Ford has decided to bypass this legislation and has prevailed upon the Lieutenant Governor to call an early election, ostensibly because he feels he needs a new mandate to deal with the tariff war with the United States. Is what Premier Ford doing completely unconstitutional, or does he have any grounds whatsoever for doing this?
Well, that's an interesting question because Section 9.1 of that Elections Act basically states that nothing in this section affects the powers of the Lieutenant Governor, including the power to dissolve legislature when the Lieutenant Governor sees fit. So, there's so essentially the Lieutenant Governor is the one who has the power to dissolve. And we had this talk about this a few weeks ago about whether is that legal to go ahead with it? Well, Section 9.1 of the Provincial Elections Act states yes, it is.
Okay. It is legal. Now, you were in discussions I had with you earlier. You said that there really is nothing that can be done to stop the Premier from going ahead with an election if he chose to walk down the hallway and prevail upon the Lieutenant Governor to dissolve Parliament.
Yeah, essentially that's the case. And, typically we think of it, we kind of get into this mode of thinking, well, in where we are with, let's say, the federal Parliament right now, Trudeau has a minority government, and once Trudeau gets into trouble, once the Prime Minister gets into trouble with not being able to pass a law that is deemed to be essential for the continuance of the country, that therefore, he can be essentially that can cause him to go and see the Governor General of Canada in order to start a date for a new election. that's been one of the things that I think we've been nervous about on the federal level for quite some time. And I think where we are just talking about the politics, I think that where Doug Ford has been is that he's been looking at for quite some time, and he made it clear in the fall of last year that politically he felt that there was some unstable weather, economic weather coming down the line to us here in Ontario, and that's why he wanted an early election. He was thinking going in the fall. He's now talking about, he's now got this election for February 27th. The wisdom of that, I don't know. There's always potential backfire there, isn't there?
Well, there is, because of what happened in 1990. David Peterson decided to call an election only 3 years into his mandate, and it backfired, and it led to the NDP victory, and they lost power completely. So I mean, there is he is taking a risk.
That said, though, at the moment, in the polls, of course, Doug Ford seems to be at around about 50%, so in a commanding lead. Right? The last time I looked
from the data I've seen.
Sorry,
from the data I've seen, if anything, he's poised to increase his majority.
Yeah. So actually, that would seem to be the case right now. But again, we talked about my trouble getting my nominations in, especially since I was trying to actually get nominated for Niagara Falls, and trudging through iced snow is not fun, let me tell you that. And when you've got very strict deadlines upon getting your nomination in, i.e. yesterday at 2:00 into the polling office, I fell a few nominees short. So that's life, I guess. But again, I think the wisdom is a February election wise. It's a question that occurs to me, and then we also might have some issues in relation to this as to whether whether people vote the way that you might think they will vote, right? But at the end of the day, the election was kind of, as soon as he walked in and asked for the writ for the election, of course, Section 9.1, subsection 5 states that the polling day shall be the 5th Thursday after the date the writ fell, unless the Governor General had any reason to deny the writ.
And how often has that happened in Canadian politics, where the Vice Regent or even federally the Governor General has actually decided against the Premier's wishes to call an election?
To my knowledge, I don't believe it has ever happened. Right? I think that is
because I recall there were two.
Go on.
Because there were two instances that I recall in 1985, when shortly after Peterson had struck the minority agreement with Bob Rae, he went to the then Lieutenant Governor Lincoln Alexander and requested that Parliament be dissolved, or the legislature be dissolved, and Lieutenant Governor Alexander denied his request, saying that that the minority appeared to be working, that Peterson still maintained confidence of the legislature, and that there was really no justification for an election. And there was also the matter in 1926 of the King Byng affair, when King was in a minority government and he was about to be voted out in a no confidence vote, and he went to the Governor General to request a dissolution, and Lord Byng, who was the Governor General,
okay, was he subsequently voted out?
Refused to do so because they had just been through an election and doing this. So no, that's your request is denied, and that was it.
Well, actually, it's
Well,
somewhat
what had
like
happened was that I recall the opposition leader.
Sorry, the opposition leader.
Oh, the opposition leader at the time, Arthur Meehan. He became prime minister for a matter of days because, as was custom back in the day, if you became prime minister or a member of the cabinet, you immediately resigned your seat and stood by-election for a by-election. And as a result, Meehan did that. And Mackenzie King, now as leader of the opposition, seized on this and demanded that,
It
that the
sounds like
government
a
should resign, because what
constitutional
Meehan had done was he appointed. Yeah, it was. It was basically Meehan had basically appointed a number of acting ministers who did not take the oath per se, and therefore didn't have to resign. But it blew up in Meehan's face. They got voted out in a vote of no confidence. Days later, they did have an election, and King got back in with an overwhelming majority. So.
Well, about last year, sometime in France, the Prime Minister of France asked the President to dissolve Parliament, and the election was less than 3 months old at the time. And the President basically said, no, get back in there, figure it out, build yourself a better coalition and get back to it. Yeah. So there are some examples around the world, and that's an interesting example which you were saying there, because generally speaking, though, I don't think in the modern world there's been much, in the 21st century, there's not been much of this.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what other alternatives, say, could Ford have used constitutionally or to justify calling an election, or maybe avoiding an election altogether?
Yeah, ultimately he would have had to have come to an election on the second Thursday of June in 2026 anyway. So that would have been a known date. That whole question about June 2026, if he wanted an election beforehand, he, as a majority holder in that parliament, I'm not sure there's anything valid, other than, well, as I say, once again, Section 9(1) is fairly clear in that the Lieutenant Governor has the power to dissolve the legislature by proclamation, right, in His Majesty's name. Must remember to change the gender.
Yeah. Okay. What is there any recourse now that for the opposition parties or the voters who see this as basically as a rigged election, because there are only 28 days to campaign? I have only seen a handful of signs throughout the entire Niagara region.
Yeah.
There have been no local debates.
There are rules about challenging the election, yeah.
Scheduled, and they're finally having their first provincial debate among the provincial leaders tonight. I think, frankly, you would see it like in an authoritarian third world regime, say in Africa or South America.
Yeah, and that's actually very concerning, because, in fact, we generally see ourselves as having a stable economy, a stable election regime, and being proud of that. And for example, under Section 7, Section 7 5.1, they could get a 6-month extension in certain circumstances, but not that would probably apply in this particular day. And begins when a writ is issued and ends 3 months after the polling day. I don't think that would apply here. And in fact, actually, might make in Ontario might make things worse, because that would have then messed up the municipal elections. Right, you were talking about alternatives, and that's one alternative. There are rules in here about calling the validity of an election. So section 4.1 subsection 4 says an election is held in accordance with this section is not valid if an election is in accordance with this section is not valid by reason of any non-compliance with this act. It's as authorized by the chief electoral officer's discretion. They can call upon, they can question the validity of the election. But that is typically about like voter fraud. Schemes that would be put into place in order to ensure that if you had a party that won and everybody suspected it was fraudulent.
Okay. Right. Now, what recourse would the opposition parties have, like in terms of legal measures, like such as a court challenge or trying to issue an injunction even after the fact or after the election?
I don't know that, based upon my look at this ruling, I think that this is fairly clear in the Act about when an election can be called and how an election is called, etc. I don't know that an injunction really would have any impact. Now, the interesting thing would be, I've not seen much in the way of case law around about this. There's a few items of case law that relate to elections, one of which related to the Toronto City versus Ontario in 2019, which was about the numbers of electoral seats within the municipality of Toronto. But that's municipal law, not provincial law. Right, and that held up the province's position.
Okay. So, all right. Let's say, let me point out a scenario. Say, like they held a hearing after the election, and the court rules that this election was in fact illegal. Where would that place
everyone? Well, theoretically, then you would be back to an election on the second Thursday of June of 26, wouldn't you? And I would assume that would also mean that all.
Right. What would that do with?
Yeah, I was going to say all the old people. All of the old MPPs would be back in power, wouldn't they? In that particular instance, because you would actually reverse the election, wouldn't you?
Exactly, and so that was one of the thoughts I had, and it is very concerning what could happen, and I find it very disturbing because, as you said earlier, Canada is known as a model for democracy. Now, it would be a good thing, say, if the courts did step in and say, no, this is unconstitutional, we have to avoid this election, but it also reflects very badly on Canada as a whole, and that we can't properly administer democratic elections.
And ultimately, any decision of that nature would have to come from the Supreme Court of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because without the authority of the Supreme Court, I think you'll find that, in fact, we'd be looking at the election, the result would need to have that authority in order to overturn the election.
Exactly. Are there any other means of overturning? Like, could the federal parliament use the power of disallowance to stop this election if need be? Not that it's likely to
Well,
happen, but would it be possible?
well, of course, with Parliament being prorogued, that would be another. That would be you'd have to return, come back from prorogation, wouldn't you, in order to make a put that nomination, put that a resolution on the floor of Parliament. So I'd say the chances of that in the current era is slim to none.
Okay, explain for the audience what exactly is prorogation.
Well, essentially, because of the challenges that the Liberal Party has with their leadership right now, Justin Trudeau has taken the step of proroguing Parliament, which basically means that it is suspended everything, all the parliamentary procedures. So Parliament is not meeting. That doesn't mean to say that we're governless. Justin Trudeau is still the Prime Minister until there is a new Prime Minister acclaimed. And in fact, actually, the new Prime Minister would have to be accepted by the Governor General of Canada on behalf of the King. And essentially, that will happen. Once that happens, then the Parliament will, I presume at that point, basically Parliament will come back into session. And the potential here, given the current minority situation, is at that point the Conservatives may well be looking for a vote no confidence. And okay. Whether they win that, that's another question entirely.
All right. We only have a few minutes left. What are your final thoughts on this? What I'm beginning to think is nothing to election, given the controversial nature, time span that we're holding this in.
Sorry, can you ask that again? I didn't. I got cut out on a number of occasions there. Okay. I don't know what's happened there. Okay, so I think Justin was asking the final thoughts on this, given everything. Now, it's an interesting election insofar as one of the things I disliked about the Ontario election was the fact that the June election was basically 4 months before the municipal election. And as a former municipal candidate, I always found that a lot of people were saying, well, we've only just had an election. Why would I vote again? All right. So I think there was some confusion there. But so in a way, I'm glad that it's moved. However, does that mean that now that we have February as being the next election date in 4 years' time, or are we going to revert that back to a different date? Essentially, it can't be more than four. If we're reading the election rules, it can't be more than 4 years in the same month as the election. So you cannot do more than 4 years. So that would mean then that next election becomes February. It starts in February in 4 years' time. Is the wisdom of that? That's yet to be seen.
Okay, that pretty much brings us to the end. Again, thank you, Peter, for sharing your thoughts on was certainly one of the most bizarre elections I've seen in Canadian electoral history. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in. And I want to remind everyone, voting day is on February 27th, and you should exercise your sacred duty to go out and vote. I'm of the opinion if you don't use it, you lose it. just my
Absolutely.
Thanks again, and thanks for watching. Have a good day.